Joe Louis once famously said that you only live once, but if you do it right, once is enough. And that would seem to apply, and rather generously, to Earline Heath King, a well-known North Carolina sculptor who may have lived enough life for 3 or 4 not-so-ordinary people in her nearly 10 decades.
Matron of honor at a wedding. I don't look a bit matronly there, do I?
Evidence of a rich and lively life surrounds this soft-spoken, fascinating lady. Art beckons from nearly every surface, some the work of her hands, and some by the prolific Vinciata, painter Joe King, whom Earline married while both were still in high school.
This was a special occasion. You noticed the heart box of candy, and as I remember, he enjoyed the candy very much.
To hear her tell it, Earline's life first began to soar during those high school years in Winston-Salem, where the arts were a vital part of the curriculum.
I doubt if I would be doing sculpting today had I not had those art classes in high school.
That early education proved to be the ticket to their future.
Oh, these were the good old days.
And so did a vacation trip the young couple took to Washington. They liked what they saw in the big city and spent a dozen years there, plus several in New York. Joe painted backgrounds for department store windows and did a ventriloquist act at night. Earline tinted portraits and sang at the Sheraton for a year. And both of them toured with the USO group during the Second World War.
It was a total variety show, and I sang ballads.
In the summer of 1946, they traveled back to Winston-Salem, and Joe found a place for his studio in the old blacksmith shop at the edge of Renolda Village and painted portraits in his studio for 50 years, until his death in 1996. One of his most interesting commissions in the early 1970s was to paint a portrait of Queen Elizabeth II.
And she had on the long dress, looked perfect until she sat down. It was a stand-up dress. It had lining in it, you know, that it looked wonderful, but when you sat down, it did funny things.
The solution, back in Winston-Salem, was for Earline to pose in a long white dress she had purchased in Paris. Joe painted that dress on the Queen.
And she never mentioned anything about, well, that's not the dress I had on, or anything like that.
And then came one of those odd events with the potential to change one's life. Her friend Sophie invited Earline to a sculpture class at the local arts council.
And I said, Sophie, no, I had no interest in it whatsoever. And you have to know Sophie to understand this. She signed me up. I almost didn't go. And I've been sculpting ever since.
It wasn't long before Earline received her first commission.
That was a big day in my life, to think someone would pay good money to have a piece of my work.
The first large-scale work that Earline tackled was a statue of R.J. Reynolds astride his horse. It's clear that she was able to capture his jaunty confidence, that a tobacco giant would emerge in time from this small city. Later, she was commissioned to create a statue of Bowman Gray, who was president and chairman of R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company in the 20s and 30s. Back then, she says,
gentleman wore hats. He had a very unusual hairstyle, parted in the middle, so I put the hat in his hand.
Another gentleman, whose image she sculpted more recently, Winston-Salem State University founder Simon Green Atkins, wears his hat, and like Bowman Gray, is dressed rather more nattily than we might expect today.
Quite a man. Double-breasted suits, shirt and tie. The one I did for the Industries for the Blind was of a gentleman that worked there for 40-some years, never missed a day of work. And we didn't put it up on a pedestal because we wanted it to go down. The way they saw it was a feel. to think that they could see him through their hands was amazing.
Each creation begins as a wad of newspaper wrapped around an armature and is built up with clay so the inside is hollow, which allows the piece to be safely removed from its stand before being fired and also not to explode while in the kiln.
And you get the idea of the whole thing. And you see how wonderful this clay is to manipulate. And sometimes if it's a little dry, I take my spray gun and because I work with a light overhead and back. It's a natural light and it casts the right shadows. It pulls out all the flaws.
One of the marks of a good sculptor is getting a likeness.
If I get the likeness, I've got the personality. That's what you're striving for. And every face is unique. It's hard to describe. We all have 2 eyes and a mouth and a nose, but there's that little variation that makes us individual. I really don't think of it when I'm working, but I can recognize what's wrong with it and can correct it. And I've got a lot of corrections to do in this young man.
For a lady who tried unsuccessfully to wiggle out of a sculpture class something like 50 years ago, Earline Heath King has gone on to create an extraordinary body of work. By now, Earline has lost track of how many sculptures she has done, but she does count her blessings.
At 94 years old, I'm still working. I have had a wonderful life so far.